Jeff resisted the urge to check his phone. Of all the things he would not be caught doing during class, he would not be caught with the lap look. Not in Mr. Flood's class. He tolerated phones for very few people, like Jeff, who had good grades and never disturbed anyone, and at that only if they weren't seen or heard. It wasn't ringing, but merely vibrating occasionally. It was annoying enough that it would stammer his concentration. Mr. Flood spoke, waving his index finger at the PowerPoint. You see, the banana has been cultivated by humans for a very long time. Behind him, the PowerPoint depicted an awkward pale green lump that was offensive to the eyes of every person in the room. Zit-faced and hormone-addled teens wrinkled their noses and frowned. Flood said, "Exactly," then changed the image to a real banana. "This is what you're used to." Faces softened, and Jeff's pocket vibrated. "So how did we get from this," the green thing appeared on screen, "to this?" The real thing appeared again. Jeff was so focused on his thigh that he didn't notice that it might have been a fun game for the teacher to flip back and forth, just to see the silly, uppity faces frown and smile, just at the touch of a button. Jeff knew it was him. Annoying and stupid Gary had been someone that Jeff had tutored all through calculus last year. The guy still had only passed with a C, but since then he had never left Jeff alone. The answer is genetic modification. This was AP Biology, and thankfully Gary was at the other end of the school. It was a gym day, which meant there was no chance of Jeff running into him all day. He knew the schedule pretty well. A bobbing tap-out cap in the front asked, "But sir, doesn't that involve intersplicing genes from other organisms? How could we have done that thousands of years ago?" Flood replied, "Anyone thinking on their toes should be able to answer this." Then Jenny, incidentally the only person in school whose GPA had been better than his, raised her hand. Flood nodded at her. She cleared her throat. "Not all genetic modifications involve splicing genes. Some are just interbreeding of certain vibrate plants that have features that are desired." Flood nodded. "Yes, exactly. Now remember what happens when a plant is tetraploid or octoploid, right? The stomata," he changed the PowerPoint, various examples of the stomata and magnification appeared, "gets larger, and the plant gets larger and larger. Vibrate. Jeff sighed. "I'm not checking it," he thought. It didn't help that Jeff thought that Gary was cute. Well, actually, he thought he had, or did have, a crush on him. Flood continued, "We know that bananas are triploid, though. So how does that occur?" The screen blanked, and he fumbled for one of his dry erase markers. With his back turned, this would be an opportune moment for Jeff to check his phone. "But I'm not going to. I'm not. I'm better than that dope. That silly alpha vibrate. Flood had drawn 2 large circles on the board representing parent cells, one with a pair of chromosomes and one with 2 pairs. Jeff drew the picture in detail in his notebook to keep his concentration. Then, unbidden without the teacher's instruction, he drew a pair of gametes underneath, one with 1 chromosome and one with 2. Then under those, one with 3. He knew already that in order to get a triploid organism, 1 gamete needed to be haploid and 1 needed to be diploid. Flood had finished drawing exactly what Jeff had drawn, and then he turned abruptly, asked, "What's wrong with this picture?" Vibrate. Jeff knew that if he answered now within this millisecond, and correctly, that the attention would be off him for a few seconds. Then he could glimpse at the phone just to see who it was. "You're hoping it's him." "No, I'm not. It might be Mom. It might be Dad." But deep down, he knew who it was. Then answered, "They're sterile." "Yes, so what does that mean for our banana crops?" Jeff let Jenny answer this. "That they're all clones?" Jeff pushed his fingers into his jeans and thumbed out his phone. All of the texts were from Gary. He didn't bother to read all of the others, just the newest one. He would read the others later as a guilty pleasure. Not that he really had to feel guilty. Everyone knew, no one cared. He swiped the lock screen open, then deftly tapped the text button, all the while looking up at Mr. Flood to make sure he hadn't noticed. The very last text read, "Do you want me to take a picture in the locker room?" He tapped the N and then sent it. He slid the phone back into his pocket. Asshole, asshole, asshole. But he would do it if I asked him to. I know it. An immediate vibration came along with a loud ding. Everyone heard. Impossible. I turned the sound down. "Jeff?" Flood asked sternly, fist on hip. All eyes in the room were on him, boring holes through him. "Jeff, why are you answering texts in the middle of class?" Sorry. "Give me the phone. You can pick it up at the end of the day." Jeff melted from his seat, stood up and handed Flood the phone. "Oh, and by the way, he doesn't like you at all," Flood said. Jeff, stunned, asked, "What? Did you just read my texts?" Still standing, he faced Flood, who said, "I didn't need to. It's all over your face," and, he pointed down. Jeff gulped and looked down. He noticed a sizable erection, visible through his pants. Boys and girls around the room chortled, covered their faces and laughed. Flood smiled. He thought, "Oh, Christ, this has got to be a nightmare." "No, it's not a nightmare," Flood continued. "However, where else but in your dreams could you imagine that the guy you have a crush on actually likes you, would text you, or even talk to you, and that you're in a position to reject him?" This sentence ended with raucous laughter. Jeff said, "Gotta be... Where can I go?" "Go home," Flood said. And like all dreams Jeff had, it transitioned smoothly without him noticing a change of venue. Where am I? Oh yes, now I remember. I was eating a plate of spaghetti with rocks, and it's so good to be married to... Gary? I think. I'm not 17, I'm 23. And the Klingon blood wine I'm drinking is... Wow. Audibly he said, "I'm still dreaming, aren't I, Gary?" Gary was busy chewing his rocks with no crunch, but he gave a passive nod in the affirmative. Little flecks of quartz and granite flowed out of his mouth and into the glass he was drinking from. Gary's gray eyes stared him down. Over a mouthful of spaghetti and diamonds, he said, "You know this means nothing, right?" He asked. His teeth had turned gray. "Yep," Jeff replied. "But you don't mind if I enjoy it anyway, do you? Go ahead."